So you have institutions. This is where I think you see some clashes, is you have institutions built for the long haul, living in a world that only understands what's about a foot and a half in front of its face.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Salty Pastor here on a Thursday afternoon in Boise, Idaho. I'm here with Pastor and Dr. Douglas Peake. My name is Harvey Friesen. I'll be your host here today. Jesse Mayer is out this week, and so I have the privilege of being able to stand in here on Thursday with you. Pastor Doug, good to be with you here this afternoon.
Well, it's good to be here, everybody. I'm so glad you guys are joining us. And if you listen to Tuesday's podcast, you got to hear everything that Pastor Harv has been digging into in Philippians chapter 1, kind of beginning with verse 19 all the way to the end of the chapter, verse 30. You did a great job of kind of illuminating all of those biblical principles.
Lemons and lemonade, baby. I mean, that's just it. I mean, we do take those biblical principles,
that's right.
And we take, in there we talked about delaying gratification. The Apostle Paul saw the kingdom of God, and he knew that one wins. And so he staked everything on the future of the win that would be that. In fact, staked his whole life on that and his whole ministry on that. Today we're going to talk about practical implications.
Yes.
What goes on in a culture that has abandoned those truths, has abandoned that fortitude, and lives for the here and the now, especially when you have things like institutions that were built for the long run. I mean, you think about the big blocks, right? I mean, you have the justice system built for the long view. You have the education system built for the long view. You have the government that was there to sustain not itself, but to actually sustain it's for the people, of the people, by the people, to sustain a life of liberty. Right? That whole goal of liberty and that concept of that. So you have institutions. This is where I think you see some clashes, is you have institutions built for the long haul, living in a world that only understands what's about a foot and a half in front of its face.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting is that what a lot of people don't realize is in the founding of our nation, it was an experiment. And the experiment was basically like this, and that is that people can govern themselves. And up to this point, most people don't realize that was a radical idea because most people were considered sheep and they needed to be ruled and controlled. And because of that, this notion of self-government was just a crazy idea. Nobody had ever done it, never really succeeded anymore. A lot of historians would say that the impetus of this, the seed that was planted that brought this concept of our Constitution was in 1215, the 13th century, in the Magna Carta. Didn't work very well, had a lot of problems, but it planted that seed, and ultimately it came to fruition. And what's really fascinating is that America was founded on a set of values, and that's what's really important to understand. And what happened is, well, if these values are reflected in certain principles, then we must build institutions around these principles. So our justice system, right, became known as a woman balancing the scales, and what does she have over her eyes?
She's blindfolded.
She's blindfolded, meaning equal justice under the law.
That's right.
And that was such a critical principle of the value. What was the value that it was built on? All men are created what? Equal. So if all men are sovereign, equal, free individuals, then they have a right to equality under the law.
And that right's a God-given right, not a state-given right.
Exactly, and that's what's so critical about the founding of our nation. Most people don't realize is that the first principle, what we're going to do is we are not going to say that it is our nation or state that gives you rights and identity. We are going to recognize the God-given rights, the creator rights.
They're already there, inalienable.
They're unalienable.
Cannot be taken away.
They can never be taken away.
In there. So you said that the institutions were built on values that were those values. It seems that we have traded the concept of values for ideologies.
Yes,
Is
and
that
that's
fair?
very insightful.
Before you get into that, help me understand, what's the difference between a value and an ideology? Is there a distinction?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and that is this: is that the value is that worldview.
Okay.
In other words, one thing that I talk on the Salty Pastor a lot, and I think people get kind of, it's like, oh, there he goes again. But it's so necessary, and that is, it all comes down to your worldview is what is the definition of what it means to be a human being.
Yes.
See, now
inherent value.
So
value starts with inherent value.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that it's like I have to define what it means to be alive. I have to define sentience. And so a value, that's a value. And then an ideology is a different worldview built on different values.
Got it.
So the values become malleable depending upon your ideology. So in some ideologies, since they don't have the value of individual sovereignty, right?
Right.
Their ideology removes individual sovereignty. Communism, Marxism is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so then what I'm hearing, just because if maybe all of you out there in YouTube land or in podcast land, are as thick-minded as I am, is so value is inherent value. And derived from that are what we would call natural law values as well. That comes with that human being, personal agency, self sovereignty, as you talked about.
Yeah.
I get to breathe air. I don't have to thank you for the air I'm breathing. It was here already before you came. Mm-hmm. Ideology comes in and starts to put in. Could we use the word manipulate those natural law or those natural values, those inherent values? That ideologies come in and they're sort of man-derived ideas on that value? How does that work?
Ideologies are frameworks by which you express your values. Okay. And so what happens is that's why your ideology can be critically important, because in some cases an ideology like Marxism negates those values.
Yeah,
in other words,
people become chattel. They become meaningless. They are taking up space.
They're wards of the state.
They're wards of the state.
Yeah, we own you. We own what you think.
Yeah,
we tell you what to think. We own you. We own what you wear, and so you become insignificant in the needs of the collective.
Which is why Christianity, true biblical Christianity, is dangerous to the state.
Super dangerous, because what it does is it says God loves everybody as what? An individual. You're sovereign. So your salvation, Christ died, the King of the universe, Christ died for you. For everyone and you. And this is what's so amazing about the gospel and why it's so threatening to governments, is because what it does is it produces a mass amount of independent thinkers.
Yeah, which is not what ideologues prefer.
Yeah.
Because they have their own ideas about what you should think.
Yeah, and the most dangerous thing to an ideological governments, to communism, to all of these things, the most dangerous things to them are martyrs. And that's what you talked about on Tuesday. You said
people die for the cause.
Paul, he says, I'll die for the cause. If I die, it's a win. And if I stay here for you, it's a win. You brought that out really well, I thought. Yeah. And that is the most threatening thing to state control, is people who will live out their convictions and be willing to be martyred. As a matter of fact, Martin Luther King's entire value premise of how he changed our society was based on that. And this is what he said over and over again. He said, we will willingly break unjust laws, because you brought up natural law, because there's a greater law that makes this an unjust law. But to show you that it's unjust, we're going to break it, and then we're going to pay the penalty. He said that's what's so interesting is you don't want to escape the penalty, because that's the only way you show it's unjust. And that's he articulated this in one of his most famous writings, the letter from the Birmingham jail.
Right. So interestingly enough is that, again, from a prison, right?
Yeah.
Because
from
what's
a prison,
the first thing
he
you
wrote
do
that.
is constrict the freedom of those people that are believers to the point of they're willing to die for.
Yeah, and what a great insight. So, and I think what's really important in your question about the ideology and values is that this is really, really important to understand, is that our original institutions, right, our justice system and the First Amendment, right, our educational system, all of those things were based on those original core values.
Right.
And now a new ideology has come in, and so what it's doing is it's using the institutions, right, to eradicate the values.
Well, that's interesting, because the institution built on the value to begin with is now turned into being the club that beats down or crushes the value.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And what's so fascinating about that is one of our founders, I don't know if it was Adams or Hamilton or whatever, they said is that this experiment and our institutions only work with a virtuous people, a virtuous and faithful people. So what was he saying?
People ascribe to values.
Exactly. In other words, you can only get your worldview or your values from one place. And this is why everybody says all the time is that America was founded on, right, Judeo-Christian values. And this is what I actually preached a message about this one. I brought a tree out, and I hung all this stuff on there. Yeah. Freedom, liberty, ability to start a family, who you're going to marry, raising your own kids, the American dream. And I put that was fruit on the tree. And I said, that all came from the tree of liberty, which is America. And then I said this, I said, but that tree was planted in the soil of Christianity. So the tree is not Christianity. We got to be really clear thinking important here. American democracy is not Christianity. Okay.
Well said.
You don't want it but it grew out of the soil of Christianity, and what new ideologies are doing is they're saying, we're going to take that tree, we're going to uproot it, we're going to plant it in a different soil, and guess what happens? It dies.
So let's go back, before we talk about our institutions here and now, let's go back to the first 300 years of civilization, where Christianity was outlawed.
Yes.
And in mass, people were so convinced of the gospel, they were willing, Martin Luther King style, to die for their values.
Yeah, over and over again.
So walk us through how that worked in that early world and how that actually shaped Western civilization.
Well, it's really quite fascinating, because what happened is historically, Christianity grew in really two powerful places, kind of simultaneously. It grew amongst the poor and the slaves like crazy. I mean, so numerically, that was the largest growth. But a lot of people are not aware is that it also grew among the oligarchy, the leadership and the rulership of Rome. And that's because Paul was arrested and he started preaching the gospel to the governors and to the proconsuls and the Praetorian Guard. Yeah. A lot of people are not aware that the Praetorians tended to be people that had started in the legions when they're, 16, 17 years of age. And now 25, 30 years later, it's like, well, I wasn't able to rise to the top, right? But I need a prestigious, trustworthy, better paying position. So Praetorians were the cream of the crop that didn't become officers and leaders. Yeah. Because not everybody is an officer and a leader, right? And so they would become Praetorians. So they tended to be extremely loyal, very mature, impossible to bribe. I mean, they were really strong. They were elite forces because of that.
And what you're saying then is that when those people looked to leadership, they found
looked to them
credibility. They found a group of people that had credibility built into them.
Yes, and guess who was preaching the gospel to them?
The Apostle Paul.
And they also were like, And this is why this relationship between Paul and the Philippian church is so powerful, because what a lot of people don't understand is that Philippi was the first 100% Gentile church.
Okay.
And in a lot of ways, because when you see the founding of it, guess what? There's no synagogue there. There's no Jewish presence there. And I think in a lot of ways, that's really what inspired, because of his relationship with them, his discourse on Mars Hill.
Okay.
Where he reasons the gospel out. And I kind of suspect, I don't have any evidence for this, but I wonder, is that how in his interactions with the Philippian church teach him how, I mean, he was already versed in rhetoric, but it was Jewish rhetoric, right? As a Pharisee.
Oh, totally.
So he's like a lawyer. I can argue that. But now I'm arguing philosophically to people who don't have a Jewish worldview.
So to go into Malcolm Gladwell's world, Philippi was essentially Paul's Hamburg for the Beatles. They got their 10,000 cycles in. He got his cycles in among the Gentiles, and he honed his discussion, which came forward at Mars Hill when he spoke to them, this God you call an unknown God, I know him, his son is Jesus Christ.
And that can only happen, and this is what's really fascinating about the Philippian church relationship with Paul, is that can only happen in the context of a loving friendship. When you have a friendship with people, you love them so much, and then I would like, you've been in these situations, I've been in these situations, you and I have had these situations, and I go, man, I am just blah, 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 and then you'll say to me, why do you even care about that?
Right,
I don't think about that, and it makes no difference in my life at all. And then I go, well, what does make a difference? Well, this really makes a difference. So then what does that do to me is I go, oh, I need to, I need to reorient.
Yeah.
And so this is what why? Because there's a context of a friendship,
earned relational
stuff. He had that with him, and so that honed him. And what I love about that,
yeah, we saw that on Tuesday. You read from the beginning of it. Go ahead. What you love about that?
Well, what I love about that is that he's preaching to the Praetorian Guard, and he says all those guys in that Philippian church, a vast majority, and we don't know exact, but we just speculate, a vast majority of them were retired Legion soldiers.
Well, yeah, and here's, I think, probably interesting. Again, we're just speculating again, is they now are overseeing a guy that is truly willing to die for what he believes.
Yeah.
And, soldiers have those comments with or conversations with themselves, asking themselves, is this war we're in worth dying for? Is there is there noble value?
Is it what we're doing noble?
Is what we're doing noble? Mm-hmm. And what they did was, I think Paul got credibility among those who had credibility in Rome, because they looked at him, go back to your point, this man is both willing to live for what he believes and die for what he believes.
Yeah, and I think that was an overwhelming focus.
Yeah.
And the whole notion of this relationship with the Philippian church is, he says, I know you feel it's a setback, maybe I got arrested, or it's bad for me and it bothers you, but I've been able to preach to the whole Praetorian Guard. And that'd be similar to like me writing you and saying, hey, I got invited to the Yankees organization to go talk to them about Jesus.
Talk to the ball players.
Yeah. Or, the Giants or the Angels or whatever.
Yeah. I'm like, how'd you get in?
Yeah. It's like, how'd you do
they
that?
arrested me. I tried to steal something in the gift shop.
They wouldn't let me in.
And then a few of the players walked by and I got to tell them about Jesus.
Yeah. And it's just so funny, because here's a funny story is I was at a conference with my wife, and it was one of those leadership conferences that was a big group, GLS, something like that. And so this guy comes, I'm eating lunch there, right? Sure. And there was another guy on staff there with me. I'm eating lunch, I'm just sitting there. This guy comes down and sits down, and he introduces himself, and to today, I can't even remember this name. And this other guy's talking to me, and and I'm just chatting with him, and he takes an interest in me, and I'm talking to him, blah, 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 blah.
Conversation.
And just having a conversation. I don't know anything at all, and I'm just talking about it, and he's like, well, what are you facing? And I go, yeah, well, what are you doing? And then I'm just like, well, I don't know if that's a good idea or not. Like what?
Yeah.
Because I'm an idea person,
Yeah.
And so anyway, afterwards, he gets up and leaves, right? And the guy goes, do you know who you were talking to? And I go, no.
No idea.
And he says the name of the guy. He goes, that is the president of World Vision.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
that's who you're talking to. Sure. So I go up and I tell Kim, who was up in the room. For some reason, she was having to work or something like that. And she goes, why didn't you? To my dream is to meet this guy. Yeah. And so I'm sitting there eating lunch with him, telling him some of his ideas don't work.
Nice. So, wait a minute. You're telling me that Doug, the luminary, told the guy that's running the whole thing for World Vision, I think your ideas may not be exactly right.
Well, I was like, I would tweak it. I think this is the main value.
The man probably walked out and thought, well, what great constructive criticism. So here you have Paul going into their world and saying this radical message. This is the radical message.
Radical.
To me. Here's people matter.
People matter.
And you got these Praetorians going, we spent our whole life going around the known world saying people don't matter unless you're a Roman citizen.
That's right. The hierarchy was just powerful.
Absolutely. And they had in their own hearts those same questions about the dignity of human beings. And you have to believe some of their friends and dear colleagues along the way died for useless things, died on the altar of some leader's ego.
Yeah, all the time. And I think
they realized that they ultimately, think about it, you said something earlier, they got to the high of what they could, but they didn't get to the top. They realized that there were still some who saw a distinction between their value and the value of the elites.
And
which
it was
is
Marxism
at its core.
Yeah, it's very hierarchical, and it was very structured that way, and it was all about accolades.
Yeah,
it was all about, boy, did I get these rewards and these accolades, and that was the only way you could move up in society. Those were actually recorded in the census every 5 years that Luke talks about and dates the birth of Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. Jesus.
And I think that's why the American experience is so radical, because it just says, in a way, every man has the freedom for himself. You don't have to earn your way up through accolades. And you go back to the message that Paul's preaching, so radical to the Praetorian Guard, is all of your accolades may matter in this world, but they don't matter in the afterlife.
The beginning construct, and maybe you're the historian, you'll know this better, but the beginning, let's say the soil, to use your analogy, the soil of the American dream, not saying it's righteous or anything like that, but the soil of the American dream was the idea that you mattered, and if you worked hard, you took advantage of opportunities, you took a few risks, you did all sorts of things, you had an opportunity at a self-sovereign life, one that pursued happiness, liberty, and and gave justice for all.
Yes.
Right? That concept is at the core of all that. I want to just stay in Rome for just 1 second, because I have to imagine this mattered to these guys. So if I'm thinking Praetorian Guard, I'm thinking people that paid their dues, that paid the price, they got to where they did because of split. There were guys with missing digits, maybe with a stump leg. I mean, who knows what price had been paid?
Yeah. They're SEAL team guys. I mean, they're the cream of the crop.
Now, who ends up in their jail in Rome? A guy who has been beaten, stoned, lashed, shipwrecked, left for dead in every measure.
Yeah.
And then here's this weird thing going on. Gentiles in Philippi who sent people to care for a Jew in Rome who had paid the same kind of price for a different and greater cause. And the gospel spread because that happened.
Yeah.
I just think that's a respect kind of thing going on. I think that people in our day and age today are desperate to know people that are authentic, that believe with conviction, and live out a virtuous life.
Yeah,
they're desperate because we live in a plastic, cheap, throwaway relationship world. We live in a world that its highest ideals and goals are all around therapy. Because what I thought that was a very interesting thing I heard one time is that I was talking with some people in Southern California one time, and they said, when we moved to Tennessee, everybody talked about what church they went to. When we moved to California, everybody talked about what therapist they went to. That's so interesting. And here you have the Apostle Paul coming into a world that had all the luxuries afforded to it of the known world, right? The Romans were the top of the food chain for that long period of time. And then he comes in, the gospel is spread, and it shapes civilization. So now we come to today. There's this country called America, and America had the soil, that soil of the Christian Judeo-Christian values, upgrows out that tree. That tree is, if we could say, it's agnostic. It's not Christian. It's not Judeo. It's
a tool.
It is a tool. It's exactly. And it's benefited from, a tool that grew from the values of inherent people. You talked about it before. Human dignity is a value. You have worth because you were made with worth in the image of God.
Yes.
Okay. So now you come in, and what happened was that tree, as you said earlier, has all these institutions that were there and what they did was they forwarded those values, and that the institution in and of itself was not the goal. The life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was that opportunity for people to go now live a self-sovereign life.
The institution was designed to protect the core value.
There you go. Okay. And now it is a bludgeoning tool to destroy those values.
Yeah, because ideologies that don't have those core values have come in, right? and taken over those institutions.
Yeah.
And I think this is really critically important to understand, is that now these institutions are being used for things that they were never intended to be used for. And
they have a lot of authority and a lot of power and a lot of
yeah.
ability to move things at a big high level.
Yeah, and I think, like, for instance, what just happened just recently is there's a school district, Caldwell Unified School District, which is a part of the Treasure Valley. It's the far western edge of it, across the interstate.
Based community,
yeah, very
strong
Hispanic presence and stuff like that. And they are debating whether to adopt a new policy that is a gender fluid, pro-transgender, gender affirming policy, and
in the school district,
and they're debating this, and the policy itself is saying, well, you can use whatever bathroom you want. If there's an overnight trip, you're allowed to stay with whatever gender you identify with. And so there's no desire. Now, when I went to high school, I was in the band, and every once in a while I'd have to go to these things, and you'd stay in a hotel room. And they had chaperones that stayed up all night long walking the hall.
Making sure nobody got out or nobody went into the wrong room.
Because we don't want any shenanigans across. We don't care what kind of shenanigans there's going to be none of it, because you're all minors, for crying out loud.
Well, there's responsibility.
Yeah, so what's interesting now is this new policy even tries to modify and support that chaperones won't be involved in any type of same-sex relationships if they choose to stay in the same room together. If they identify as transgendered, they can stay with the opposite gender. And so the issue there is that it's not just a policy that says, hey, we want to try to be mindful of things people are dealing with. It's now we are going to affirm and support and propagate it. And so what's interesting now is the reason they're doing this is they said, well, we want inclusion for all. And so, okay, I don't think people are opposed to including people, but I'm opposed as a parent for you taking my 7th grader on a field trip, or my 7th grader, and saying, you're a female and you now have to change your clothes for gym class with a guy in your locker room. You know, I'm not opposed. I'm opposed to that. How in the world did we go from, hey, we want to be mindful of people and treat people with respect, right? Include them in the educational process, to we're going to groom and force you into sexual immorality and sexual issues. And if you are opposed to this, then you're the problem. And it's just like, okay, that's a huge difference. I was talking
There's no logic to that, by the way.
There's no logic
to that. That's built on frontal lobe. I do whatever I want to do. Please me. This is my opinion. And instead of values being an ultimate guide, it's emotions that become an ultimate guide.
And so here's a perfect. What people have no discernment anymore, and that is, there was a hockey player in the NHL, right?
Okay.
And his name is, I think, Popov or something of that nature. And their team decided to have a pride event. Okay. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to put gay pride stuff on his jersey, right?
Okay, yeah.
And he just simply said, I don't want that on my jersey.
Yeah.
You know, he said, I'm not going to put that.
Don't put your bumper sticker on my car.
Yeah, don't put your bumper sticker on my car. And so they said, why? And he just said, because that's my thing.
I have self-sovereignty.
Yeah. He goes, I respect my beliefs. I go, I respect your beliefs. You do whatever you want, but you can't force me to wear the bumper sticker on my jersey.
Right. I won't tell you to wear any bumper stickers that I might care about on your jersey. Okay.
And so there was a huge outcry, and all of these people on ESPN and all these other sports writers came in. They wanted him fired. They wanted to dismiss him because they said he was a bigot and he was all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
And so they really went after him. What's really fascinating is, guess what?
What?
His jersey sold out.
Really?
Yeah, because he just said no, and they tried to bait him to get him to say stuff, but all these people are calling him all these things. And so one of my sons was talking to me, and he sent me a tweet. He goes, this just shows you how brain dead people are. And I responded to it as I said, it's interesting that people cannot discern the difference between there are things you shouldn't say and then things that the government requires you to say. And what's happening now in our society,
the government that is being told, you have to say that.
You have to say this. And that's the whole issue with pronouns. Pronouns is in our institutions, you have to say this. You have to address me this way. I am forcing you what to say.
Which is a violation of
your personal sovereignty. Yeah. And it's about control. It's about mind control. So the only way we combat this, right, is if we take Paul's attitude, for to me to live is Christ, but to die is gain. Whether I live or die.
And to die is gain.
And to die is gain. Thank you. That is the value, is where we say we're living for something so much bigger, so much greater. That's the only way these institutions can be saved. We see this in education. We see this in our justice system. We're seeing this in politics and all kinds of things.
So we have to stand
even
for
in
the value.
science, with what's going on with the pandemic and how science was corrupted for political purposes. I think the fascinating thing is that the only way we combat this is if we adopt this core value of Paul again, that you're going to be preaching on Sunday, of how that is what brings clarity of focus to who we are, who we're called to be, who we're meant to be. Otherwise, we're in a losing game.
You heard it again here from the Salty Pastor on a Thursday afternoon here in Boise, Idaho. Glad you joined us as we talk about real things in a real world, not telling you what to think, but convicting you to think. So good to be with you. We'll see you again next week.
Blessings.